powers that have the ability to restrain Israel don't force that action. And Netanyahu is convinced that the more Iran is able to actually do destruction inside of Israel, the more maneuverability he has to expand the war and leverage that to bring other actors in. So I think that the problem is the incentive structure is very bad. And for Netanyahu, he does not have a lot of incentive to stop this action. I think for the Iranians, it's a matter of them calculating what do they want to do in retaliation. Is there a risk of then bringing outside powers in against them? How do they increase the deterrent effect of what they're doing without actually enlarging the war in a way that would really be bad for them?
What is available to Iran in terms of its retaliation? Because tonight, for example, we've seen a second wave of missiles being thrown from Iran to Israel, some of them making impact. What else is available to the country?
Beyond conventional methods and the ballistic missiles and the hypersonic missiles, that I think we have not fully seen the extent of the damage that could be done and may be done. There's also, along those, in that framework, there is the targeting of, civilian infrastructure, economic infrastructure, something that the Israelis have now opened the box, Pandora's box to, by attacking Iranian energy facilities. And so that's sort of an enlargement. There's also, there's a lot of talk about the how boxed in the axis of resistance is at this point, and I think that's very true. However, asymmetric warfare and both the use of proxies and even, using proxies outside of the region, if this expands, those are the things that I worry about. And I think that we still see the escalation ladder. We're still a few rungs away from some of these kind of nightmare scenarios that we're talking about, but rapidly we are climbing up that ladder. And so that's why, whether it's Trump or whoever it needs to be, at this point, nobody is saying no to Netanyahu. The E3 has completely caved and made this supposedly an act of self-defense in their eyes. So unless somebody's going to restrain Netanyahu and finally tell him no, I see those rungs of the ladder quickly approaching.
Jamal Abdi, very interesting indeed to get your views there from Washington, D.C. Thanks very much for joining us. My
pleasure.
Still ahead here on Al Jazeera. A parade is underway celebrating the anniversary of the U.S. military, whilst many Americans take the opportunity to protest against President Trump's policies.
Al Jazeera, wherever you are.
China's leaders promised economic prosperity in exchange for tight control over the country's population. But is that a trade-off that the Chinese people accept?
He really sees himself as a leader who is chosen by destiny to make China strong.
Ken Roth speaks with journalist and author Emily Feng.
They do feel like they've done so much to economically develop these regions, but of course they're missing the whole picture, which is that you're also trampling on people's human rights.
Reframe on Al Jazeera.
Again, you're watching Al Jazeera. As a reminder of our main story this hour. Several parts of Israel have been repeatedly targeted by Iranian missiles on Saturday night. At least one person has been killed and 3 others injured in a new wave of attacks. Iran's Revolutionary Guards have said that if Israel continues its hostilities, Tehran's attacks will become heavier and more extensive. Israel has been targeting civilian and energy infrastructure across Iran. An oil depot near the capital, Tehran, is on fire. Israel has declared Iran as the primary combat zone and downgraded Gaza to a secondary arena of war. Well, these attacks and counterattacks came right as Iran was engaged in talks with the US over a potential deal on its nuclear program. A 6th round of indirect talks were scheduled for Sunday. But Iran's foreign minister has told Al Jazeera that those talks are now cancelled. A parade celebrating the US military's 250th anniversary is underway in Washington, D.C. This is coinciding with President Donald Trump's 79th birthday and is showing off some of the most advanced military equipment in the world in the streets of the US Capitol. It's said to have cost more than $45 million. Our correspondent Patty Culhane is at that parade. So, Patty, talk us through the spectacle that's unfolding around you.
Well, how about I show you? Well, I tell you about it. Now we're seeing up-armored, I think this is an up-armored Humvee. We've seen tanks roll through the streets. We've seen artillery pieces. Of course, lots of soldiers. We're expecting 6,000 soldiers, dozens of planes and helicopters, more than 150 armored vehicles. And this is somewhat controversial because, as you mentioned, it's the 250th anniversary of the founding of the U.S. Army, but it's also U.S. President Donald Trump's 79th birthday. We know that when he went in his first term to France, he watched Bastille Day. He came home and said, I want a parade that's bigger and better than that. So at the first term, his advisors convinced him that that was a bad idea, but he wanted to do it. I don't know how he's going to feel about this because I've seen Bastille at least on TV, and this is not at all what the French celebrations look like. But that said, it is controversial because the low estimate, I think, is $45 million. $16 million of that is going to have to go to fix the streets behind me because these are meant for maybe trucks, cars. They're weight limited at about 36,000 kilograms, and those tanks are almost double that. So again, very controversial because people wanted to say that this is, at least as critics say, that this is more a celebration of President Donald Trump. I can tell you that it is about to pour down rain, and it's been a very hot day. But if you look at the setup around here, it's very clear that they were expecting much bigger crowds than this. Parade, 2 people deep. So one person, that person, the parade. And it's not that big of a stretch of road. And they have incredible amounts of facilities set up.
Unfortunately, we've just lost connection to Patty Culhane, and she was talking through the numbers of people watching that parade in Washington, D.C., being slightly smaller than organisers had hoped for, perhaps because rain is imminent over the capital. Well, ahead of the parade, tens of thousands of people have been attending rallies in protest against Trump and his policies. The theme of the protests is No Kings, signalling no person is above the law. Trump's use of the military has drawn strong criticism after he authorised the deployment of thousands of National Guard soldiers and Marines to control protests in California against his immigration raids. 2 Democratic lawmakers in the U.S. state of Minnesota have been shot. President Donald Trump says it appears to be a targeted attack. Former House Speaker Melissa Hortman and her husband were killed inside their home in a politically motivated assassination. A second lawmaker, State Senator John Hoffman, and his wife were also shot and wounded in their home. Local authorities say the suspect is still at large and was dressed as a police officer. Now, Israeli forces have placed the occupied West Bank under siege, sealing the entrances of cities and villages with iron gates and concrete barriers. Movements have become severely restricted as Palestinians say they're being caught in the crossfire of the Israel-Iran escalation. Lida Ibrahim has this report.
As life comes to a standstill in Israel, Palestinians in the occupied West Bank are under a lockdown. Not to protect them, they say, but to keep Israel's control over their lives. Israeli forces closed military checkpoints, installed new gates and cement blocks to restrict Palestinians' movement. Even ambulances are struggling to help patients.
Even when we are granted an Israeli military permission to move, we're detained at checkpoints for 3 to 4 hours before being allowed through. This morning, one woman stayed 3 hours at one checkpoint. The only way we can function now is by transferring patients from one ambulance car to another at these checkpoints.
This Israeli poster describes the closure as preemptive, saying that movement will be restricted until further notice. It reads, "Terror only brings death and destruction." Palestinians say they're the ones under attack. In several areas across the occupied West Bank, Israeli soldiers expelled dozens of families from their homes, turning them into military positions. An Israeli assault targeting 3 refugee camps in Jenin and Tulkarim has been ongoing since January.
Israel increased the checkpoints and barriers in the West Bank from 600 to 900 since October the 7th. Now they're using this time to increase the lockdown on Palestinians, turning them into isolated cantons, separated from one another.
Settlers continue attacking Palestinian homes and properties. Others exploit the siege to establish and expand new illegal settlement outposts like this one near Nablus. Palestinians say they're caught between the Iranian projectiles and Israeli missiles intercepting them. They witness interceptions in the sky without access to bomb shelters or any protection. Remnants of intercepted missiles caused dozens of injuries among Palestinians in the occupied West Bank. The Palestinian government says it's working to ensure the entry of food and fuel. With Israel controlling almost every aspect of their lives, Palestinians fear their government's ability to assist them is severely limited. Nida Ibrahim, Al Jazeera.
Well, while the world's focus has shifted to the conflict between Israel and Iran, the Israeli military is still waging its war on Gaza. At least 58 Palestinians have been killed in a series of attacks across the Strip on Saturday. One of the latest strikes was on a group of civilians waiting for deliveries of flour near Gaza City. The Israeli military has repeatedly attacked Palestinians trying to get food distributed by the controversial Gaza Humanitarian Foundation. The group is backed by Israel and the US and has been accused of weaponizing aid. India's aviation regulator says all possible causes of a plane crash on Thursday are under investigation. Forensic teams are still looking for the Boeing 787 Dreamliner's cockpit voice recorder. The flight data recorder was recovered on Friday. The Air India jet crashed into a residential area in the western city of Ahmedabad just after takeoff. The airline's fleet of Boeing 787 aircraft is being inspected.
We also felt that there is a need to do an extended surveillance into the Boeing 787 series. So from the DGCA, we have also given an order to do the extended surveillance for the 787 planes. There are 34 in our Indian aircraft fleet today. I believe that 8 have already been inspected, and then with immediate urgency, all of them are going to be done.
And that's it from me, Laura Kyle. You can find plenty more on our website. That's aljazeera.com. There you can see ongoing live updates on all the latest developments on the Iran-Israel escalation. Also ahead, we've got the weather, then Inside Story, looking at Iran's ability to defend itself without the support of its allies in the region. Then Silvania is next here on Al Jazeera.
Hello, lots of storms rumbling away across central and eastern parts of the US. You can see the thunderheads there just around the Appalachians. Little area of low pressure just to the south of the Great Lakes. Another weather system just around the northern plains through the prairies into central parts of Canada. Useful rainfall here in terms of the fires then. Majority of the wetter weather will be further east towards that eastern third of the country. And notice the deep south also picking up some lively storms. Hot and humid, Dallas at around 35 Celsius. Proper warmth down towards the southwest. Largely dry across western parts of the US, in fact, over the next couple of days. But you can see the warmth continuing, temperatures quite widely getting up around the high 20s into the low 30s for many. More showers down towards that southeastern corner. Now, you have some showers, some wetter weather just clipping the far southwest of Mexico with tropical storm Delilah very close by, brushing some wet weather in here. That'll be a weakening feature. It will pull offshore, not making landfall, but central areas, Central America, Guatemala, El Salvador, seeing some really heavy showers as we go through Sunday on into Monday. 1 or 2 showers for the islands, but plenty of sunshine.
We'll wake early today, my lovely, to see the sun rising over our Uzbekistan. I'll weave your hair for you beautifully, just like the roads that stretch further than you can see. The sun will smile on you. You'll see our glorious land, bathed in its golden rays. Open your heart and embrace the magic. Uzbekistan, crossroads of civilizations.
With its allies significantly weakened, Iran is left to confront Israel on its own. It has launched a barrage of missiles at Israel in retaliatory strikes without its traditional support in the region. With Tehran apparently exposed, what might be the outcome of this conflict? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Cyril Venier. Israel pounds Iran and Iran strikes back, hitting Tel Aviv. Since Israel's war on Gaza began in October 2023, Israel has damaged Iran, not just at home, but also outside its territory by hitting its allies. Hezbollah's leader, Hassan Nasrallah, was assassinated in Beirut. The Houthis in Yemen have taken hits, as well as militias in Iraq. Israel struck Iranian interests in Syria, and Tehran's ally there, former Syrian leader Bashar al-Assad, was deposed. Hamas's leadership has also been decimated, with an assassination being carried out in Tehran. So is Iran now fighting from a weakened position? What does this mean for the future of Iran's rulers? And where does this leave the balance of power in the Middle East? I'll put all of this to our guests. First, though, Imogen Kimber has this report.
Iran's response to Israel's attacks across the country.
The Zionist regime made a grave mistake, an enormous miscalculation, a blatant wrongdoing, and by God's grace, its consequences will bring it to ruin.
Israel's strikes on Friday were unprecedented.
We've taken out top military commanders, senior nuclear scientists, the Islamic regime's most significant enrichment facility, and a large portion of its ballistic missile arsenal. More is on the way. The regime doesn't know what hit them. They don't know what will hit them.
But Iran's ability to fight is more limited than before October 2023. That's when Israel began to intensify its attacks on Iran's allies in the Middle East, leaving its network weakened. The assassination of Hassan Nasrallah in September 2024, the popular leader of Hezbollah, left the armed group and Iran diminished, weakening their opposition to Israel. But Hezbollah had already been weakened by Israel's targeted killing of a number of high-ranking officials, and an attack through mobile devices earlier that month that also killed many operatives. In Iraq, Israel has hit Iranian facilities and targeted Iranian-backed militias. Similarly, in Syria, Israel has struck the Iranian consulate killing Iranian military figures and hitting Hezbollah facilities. The fall of Iran's ally in Syria, Bashar al-Assad, in December 2024, led to a new government that does not favour Tehran. In Yemen, Israel hit Hodeidah port and Sana'a airport, in a blow to the Iranian-backed Houthis. And in Gaza, Israel has decimated Hamas, killing leader Yahya Sinwar along with other military figures, including political leader Ismail Haniyeh, while he was on Iranian soil. With Iran's so-called axis of resistance weakened, where does this leave Iran's defences, and ultimately the future of the Middle East? Imogen Kimber, Al Jazeera for Inside Story.
Let's bring in our guests in Beirut. Rani Shattah is a political commentator, writer, and host of the Beirut Banyan podcast. In Isfahan, in Iran, Sitareh Sadeghi is assistant professor at the University of Tehran's Faculty of World Studies. And in Washington, D.C., David Darosh is professor at the National Defense University, former Pentagon director for Arabian Peninsula Affairs. David, this is very much your patch. I'll go to Isfahan first, because Sitareh, Isfahan is home to one of the nuclear sites that has been struck by Israel. You live there. I want to ask you, what are people there saying at this point, at this moment in time? And I don't mean the official Iranian authorities' reaction. I mean people living in Isfahan. What are they saying right now?
Well, people are concerned about how far the Israeli aggression can go, because we know the history of Israel killing civilians and children in Palestine and in other countries, and also in Iran. In Tehran, many children and civilians that had nothing to do with Iran's nuclear program or defense facilities have been killed. So people are kind of worried, but at the same time, especially the scenes that they saw last night, their country responding to Israeli aggressions, they have been celebrating it on the streets and talking about it. But of course, everyone is wondering how long this war is going to last, and what is going to stop Israel but Iran's defense system, because as we have seen with genocide going on in Palestine, the international community and the UN do not seem to be interested in stopping a genocide or a war on civilians.
So as we record this conversation, right now Iran has already fired multiple rounds of ballistic missiles at Israel and appears, relative to this conflict, appears to have done relatively little damage. How do you assess Iran's response so far?
I think Iran's response so far is just the beginning of what Israel is going to receive. It's definitely not proportionate to what Israel has been doing, which Iran does not claim to have done either. Iran says that they have just begun Operation True Promise 3, and this is the first step of that. And I think it pretty much depends on how Israel wants to extend the war and extend its aggression on Iranian civilians, officials, and military personnel. So we're sure that more is going to come, and it probably depends on how the exchange of fires will continue. But as I said, Iran does not claim that they have started the major part of their response to the Israeli aggression.
David, tapping into your defense expertise, the Israeli military says that the skies to Iran are effectively open, meaning their aerial pathway for the Israeli jets to go and bomb Tehran. In fact, they said Tehran, not Iran, is open to them. Is Iran currently defenseless against Israeli air attacks?
Well, I wouldn't say Iran's weak, but I would say they're vulnerable. So there's two developments. The first is they invested very heavily. Their number one defense priority, acquisition priority for the last 15 years was the S-300 radar. Israel destroyed that in the wake of the first two Iranian attacks on Israel in April and October of last year. They destroyed the radar for it, and that renders the system ineffective. The homegrown Iranian air defense systems, Bavar and other variants, which were mostly reverse engineered copies of Western and Russian systems, have proven to be ineffective or easily countered. I think that this is due to several factors. The first is Israel's technological advantage in electronic warfare, which allowed them, I believe, to spoof or blind air defense radar. The second is that Israel had a number of agents and has a number of agents, probably to include armed forces personnel who they've inserted on the ground, who have attacked air defense facilities from drones. We'll learn more about that in coming months, and it'll be fascinating. But the third, and this shouldn't be overlooked, is the role of corruption in the Revolutionary Guard specifically and the Iranian regime in general. And history shows us, we've seen this particularly with the Russians in the war in Ukraine, which has not achieved the success I thought it would achieve, that that corruption hollows things out. And I wouldn't be surprised to find out down the line that, for example, some of the Bavar systems were supposed to have higher level components that cost more, but a Revolutionary Guard Corps officer or an air defense officer substituted a cheaper part and pocketed the money. When you have 45% of an economy, by some estimates, probably lower, controlled by the military, inevitably you get a poor military and a poorly functioning economy. And I think that that's really the research point going forward for us to look at.
Ronnie, Iran famously has allies across the Middle East. Shia militias in Iraq, Houthis in Yemen, Hezbollah in Lebanon, where you are. Can Iran at this stage count on any of them for help?
Well, to make it personal, if you will, the last time I was on this show, it was under Israeli bombardment, and that's last year. Late last year, an aggressive campaign, as the Israelis were going after the entire Hezbollah leadership, and the sounds of explosions were recurring while we were doing this show. That's late last year. I think there's a fundamental shift that took place since late last year and today, which is the consequence of that war, meaning the crippling and degradation of Hezbollah in Lebanon, I think in a way prevents any type of Hezbollah autonomous decision, or for that matter, Iranian decision-making, to put Hezbollah in the fray right now. They're weakened and they're vulnerable. And a consequence of that war also is a new Lebanese government that it's made it, in a way, its mission to dismantle all sub-state militias, whether it's Hezbollah or whether it's Palestinian factions in this country. You have a new president, a former Lebanese army commander, current president, who has said part of his tenure will be a dialogue with Hezbollah towards disarmament. There is local pressure at preventing Lebanon from becoming a battlefield this round. And I'll add to that, Hezbollah so far, Hezbollah leadership, has not indicated any interest in taking part this round. That said, it is premature. It's less than 48 hours. Things could escalate to a point where the Iranian regime sees a necessity to reactivate what was once, and I think largely remains, its crown jewel among proxies in the region. As of now, that has not happened.
Okay, I want to ask both Sitara and David their thoughts on Iran's regional allies, because the security of Iran has for a long time been predicated on maintaining this regional network of paramilitary groups or armed groups, call them what you will. Iran calls it the axis of resistance. Israel calls it the ring of fire. Some analysts will refer to it as forward defense strategy. Sitare, can that come through for Iran at this moment in time?
Well, I think it's very important to know that it's the imperialist wording that would call those independent resistance groups that are popular within their countries as proxies, or just militias that are depending on Iran. It's taking agency and credit away from the local populations that voted for those groups or worked to resist colonialism and imperialism. But it's also important to know Iran is a plus 90 million population. It's a country the size of Germany and France combined. Iran, under sanctions and aggressions, has defended itself. And unlike what your other guest thinks, it's the IRGC corruption that has made Iran's military weak, I would say what.
I'm Cyril Vanier. This is Al Jazeera live from Doha with our continuing coverage. Coming up right now, it was, well, what you're seeing live on your screen right now. We're seeing projectiles over the skies of Tel Aviv. Moments ago, the Israeli military did warn that Iranian missiles had been fired from Iran. Now, we know that the travel time of Iranian missiles from Iran to Israel is roughly around 12 minutes. We also know that sirens sounded over Tel Aviv, I beg your pardon, over Jerusalem a short while ago, and explosions were heard. What you're seeing now is Tel Aviv. Currently watching different angles of Tel Aviv. Missiles were fired from Iran moments ago. And it does appear, based on what we just saw, that there may have been multiple direct hits on Tel Aviv once again. Now, the flares in the sky, as our viewers will know by now, more often than not, are Israel's air defenses. Remember that Israel has multiple layers of air defenses, whether it's Arrow, whether it's Iron Dome, whether it's David's Sling, as they're known, which are all designed to intercept different types of missiles, short-range rockets, medium-range, long-range. It is known, however, that depending on the number of missiles and the speed and the trajectory, those systems can sometimes be overwhelmed, and they're also not 100%, meaning that some of the missiles do get through, which is what we saw 24 hours ago and 48 hours ago. Earlier today, Iranian missiles hit the city of Haifa. Iranian state TV reporting that they hit energy infrastructure in Israel's Haifa. Now, Iran had promised a very strong response. This is not the first volley of missiles that we have seen incoming into Israel today, and there may be more during the night. Again, you're watching the skies over Tel Aviv. Bear in mind that at the same time, Israel also conducting attacks in Iran, with Israel having said some hours ago that they had essentially cleared a pathway for Israeli fighter jets to reach the Iranian capital, meaning that they say that they have disarmed Iranian air defense systems over the western half of the country, allowing Israeli fighter jets a clear passage to the capital. We have this report now from Al Jazeera's Bernard Smith in the Jordanian capital, Amman.
This latest wave of Iranian missiles has hit targets, we understand, at least in Haifa, a port city in the north of Israel, and there are reports of casualties from there. There was no sirens this time in Jerusalem, so the threat not considered significant enough there to send people to their shelters in Jerusalem. The Israeli military also says, as regards Iran, it now has complete control and freedom of movement in Iranian airspace from the west of the country to Tehran. Earlier, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said that soon Israeli jets will be flying over Tehran and we will hit every site and target of the Iranian regime. We know that Israel has changed the focus of its attacks now from degrading Iran's nuclear capabilities to attacking infrastructure targets, hitting Bandar Abbas port, and that is one of the headquarters of the Iranian Navy, and also hitting its major gas production field. Israel's President Isaac Herzog, he said this country is at an historic crossroads. It's not just our struggle, it's a struggle for all who seek peace. And looking ahead to the G7 meeting in Canada on Monday, he's called for all leaders there to unequivocally stand and stand with Israel at this critical moment. These, of course, leaders of countries who've become increasingly critical of the way Israel is conducting the war in Gaza, and some seeing this attack on Iran as a way to deflect attention from what Israel is doing in Gaza. Bernard Smith, Al Jazeera, Amman.
And Al Jazeera's Tawhid Asadi reports now from Tehran.
Tensions and escalations are ramping up to an unprecedented level between Iran and Israel. Iran is now striking back after Israelis started military operation strikes across the country, targeting different, let's say, nuclear, military, and civilian places inside Iran. And here in the capital, from time to time, we hear sounds of explosion. But tonight, the Iranian forces, and in particular IRGC, announced that they have started a new round of attacks to the Israeli territories using drones and ballistic missiles. And also we heard from an Iranian high-ranking security official saying that Iran has prepared itself for a prolonged confrontation and that it's going to increase its attacks to the Israeli territories. The situation looks highly complicated as both sides are talking about their intention to increase attacks. But how future could unfurl is something for which we have to wait and see. Tawhid Asadi, Al Jazeera, Tehran.
Our Israeli forces have placed the occupied West Bank under siege, sealing the entrances of cities and villages with iron gates and concrete barriers. Movement has become severely restricted as Palestinians say they are caught in the crossfire of the Israel-Iran escalation. Nida Ibrahim reports.
As life comes to a standstill in Israel, Palestinians in the occupied West Bank are under a lockdown. Not to protect them, they say, but to keep Israel's control over their lives. Israeli forces closed military checkpoints, installed new gates and cement blocks to restrict Palestinians' movement. Even ambulances are struggling to help patients.
Even when we are granted an Israeli military permission to move, we're detained at checkpoints for 3 to 4 hours before being allowed through. This morning, one woman stayed 3 hours at one checkpoint. The only way we can function now is by transferring patients from one ambulance car to another at these checkpoints.
This Israeli poster describes the closure as preemptive, saying that movement will be restricted until further notice. It reads, "Terror only brings death and destruction." Palestinians say they're the ones under attack. In several areas across the occupied West Bank, Israeli soldiers expelled dozens of families from their homes, turning them into military positions. An Israeli assault targeting 3 refugee camps in Jenin and Tulkarim has been ongoing since January.
Israel increased the checkpoints and barriers in the West Bank from 600 to 900 since October the 7th. Now they're using this time to increase the lockdown on Palestinians, turning them into isolated cantons, separated from one another.
Settlers continue attacking Palestinian homes and properties. Others exploit the siege to establish and expand new illegal settlement outposts like this one near Nablus. Palestinians say they're caught between the Iranian projectiles and Israeli missiles intercepting them. They witnessed interceptions in the sky without access to bomb shelters or any protection. Remnants of intercepted missiles caused dozens of injuries among Palestinians in the occupied West Bank. The Palestinian government says it's working to ensure the entry of food and fuel. With Israel controlling almost every aspect of their lives, Palestinians fear their government's ability to assist them is severely limited. Nida Ibrahim, Al Jazeera.
At least 58 Palestinians have been killed in a series of attacks across the Gaza Strip on Saturday. One of the latest strikes was on a group of civilians waiting for deliveries of flour near Gaza City. The Israeli military has repeatedly attacked Palestinians trying to get food distributed by the controversial Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, which is backed by both Israel and the United States, and has been accused of weaponizing aid. All right, and before we go to a short break, I do want to leave you with the latest pictures that we received from Tel Aviv. So this was just moments ago, about 10 minutes ago, no more than that. The skies over Tel Aviv. Iranian missiles were launched some 10 minutes or so before that, which is roughly the travel time for missiles from Iran to Israel. The sirens, as you hear there, sounded in Tel Aviv. Sirens were also reported to have sounded in Jerusalem. Now, those explosions are very likely Israel's interception systems, which operate on multiple levels. We're unable to report at this moment whether or not there was a hit on Tel Aviv from that particular volley of missiles, but earlier today, 3 people were killed in northern Israel as Iranian missiles hit Haifa. All of this part of the ongoing exchange of attacks and missiles from Israel and Iran. That is where things stand moments before 00 GMT. We take a short break and we'll be back at the top of the hour.
In-depth analysis of the day's headlines.
What powers the UN does and does not have right now.
Critical debate.
Is this basically conflict born out of the colonial legacy?
Well, I think you can put it that way.
Informed opinions.
Sudan's humanitarian envelope has been consistently underfunded, which was not the case, for example, for Ukraine.
Inside Story on Al Jazeera.
Investigative journalism. Global experts in discussion. Voices from different corners. Programs that open your eyes to an alternative view of the world today. On Al Jazeera. Hard-hitting interviews.
As a former leader of a G7 country, how worried are you?
Facing realities.
What kind of leader would you like to see take the country forward after this interim period is over?
Not go back to the old fascist regime that we have.
Thought-provoking answers.
What exactly was the pressure? Who was it coming from? Were threats made?
Pro-Israel groups are very active in each country. This is no secret.
Hear their story on Talk to Al Jazeera.
Hello, lots of storms rumbling away across central and eastern parts of the US. You can see the thunderheads there just around the Appalachians. Little area of low pressure just to the south of the Great Lakes. Another weather system just around the northern plains through the prairies into central parts of Canada. Useful rainfall here in terms of the fires then. Majority of the wetter weather will be further east towards that eastern third of the country. And notice the deep south also picking up some lively storms. Hot and humid, Dallas at around 35 Celsius. Proper warmth down towards the southwest. Largely dry across western parts of the US, in fact, over the next couple of days. But you can see the warmth continuing, temperatures quite widely getting up around the high 20s into the low 30s for many. More showers down towards that southeastern corner. Now, you have some showers, some wetter weather just clipping the far southwest of Mexico with tropical storm Delilah very close by, brushing some wet weather in here. That'll be a weakening feature. It will pull offshore, not making landfall, but central areas Central America, Guatemala, El Salvador, seeing some really heavy showers as we go through Sunday on into Monday. 1 or 2 showers for the islands, but plenty of sunshine.
African narratives from African perspectives.
It's a beautiful morning, a bright sky. Definitely be a good flight.
Short documentaries from African filmmakers from Kenya, Nigeria, and Rwanda.
My heart is full of joy. I love this job so much.
Conservation from above, joy in the traffic, and feeling the game. Africa Direct on Al Jazeera.
Injustice, for me, is the driving force of why I do this, to show people what it's like to live in places where injustice isn't something you read in the news, it's something that happens to you every single day. Whether it's a war or a natural disaster, whether it's political corruption, making sure that they understand in a simple language is absolutely crucial.
The city's already 50% evacuated. Most of those people actually left in the early days of the war.
I couldn't do this job without the best cameramen, the best producers, the best fixers, and those are the people that I rely on in order to be able to get that message out to the world.
Investigative journalism, global experts in discussion, voices from different corners, programs that open your eyes to an alternative view of the world today. On Al Jazeera.
I'm Cyril Vanier. It's good to have you with us. You're watching Al Jazeera with continuing coverage of the escalating conflict between Israel and Iran. Iran launches missiles at targets across Israel. Just moments ago, a barrage struck Tel Aviv. Israeli attacks hit energy and civilian infrastructure in Iran, including at least 2 oil refineries. Nuclear deal negotiations between the U.S. and Iran are canceled. Iran says that they would be meaningless right now. Protesters rally across the U.S. against Donald Trump as the military parade that he has organized is underway in Washington. Missile attacks between Israel and Iran have been escalating for a second night in a row. At least 3 people have been killed in northern Israel and several injured across the country. Air raid sirens were activated in major cities, including Tel Aviv and Haifa on Saturday night. Israel's air defenses have been intercepting most of the missiles, but some have hit, including at least one in Haifa. Now, at least one projectile struck Haifa, as we were saying, where a fire has broken out at a strategic facility. There's been significant damage on the ground. Emergency services are responding. The 2 countries, Iran and Israel, have been trading missile and drone attacks for 2 days now. The Israeli cities of Tel Aviv and Haifa, we just showed you, are around 2,000 kilometers away from Tehran. Missiles launched by both sides take, on average, 12 minutes to reach their targets and cross over international airspace, Iraqi, Jordanian, and Syrian airspace. Israel is targeting civilian and energy infrastructure across Iran. An oil depot near the capital, Tehran, is on fire. Israel has declared Iran now as the primary combat zone and downgraded Gaza to a secondary arena of war. Al Jazeera's Tawhid Asadi reports from Tehran.
Tensions and escalations are ramping up to an unprecedented level between Iran and Israel. Iran is now striking back after Israelis started military operation strikes across the country, targeting different, let's say, nuclear, military, and civilian places inside Iran. And here in the capital, from time to time, we hear sounds of explosion. But tonight, the Iranian forces, and in particular IRGC, announced that they have started a new round of attacks to the Israeli territories using drones and ballistic missiles. And also we heard from an Iranian high-ranking security official saying that Iran has prepared itself for a prolonged confrontation and that it's going to increase its attacks to the Israeli territories. The situation looks highly complicated as both sides are talking about their intention to increase attacks. But how future could unfurl is something for which we have to wait and see. Toid Asadi, Al Jazeera, Tehran.
Let's turn now to Bernard Smith, who's in the Jordanian capital, Amman, covering this for us. Bernard, we are watching live the skies over, beg your pardon, this is Tehran. So we're toggling between Tehran and Tel Aviv, where we saw, especially over Tel Aviv, we saw what looked to be interceptions less than 20 minutes ago. Have you been able to find out anything about the results of that latest attack by Iran on Israel, with Tel Aviv now being in the top right corner of our screen for our viewers?
So the Israelis are telling us now that the Israelis are reporting that sirens have gone off in Jerusalem, as well as Haifa. They went off in Haifa earlier and in Tel Aviv, and that people have been ordered to go to their shelters. We don't know yet what the scale of damage of these missiles which are just coming in is, or how many of them have got through yet. We know from the first of this evening's barrage that 3 people were killed in northern Israel, and there have been some other injuries as well. This wave now, again, ordinarily, Israel's missile protection system, this Iron Dome, they call it, over the country, has generally been effective in intercepting and destroying most of the missiles that are coming from Iran, but not all of them. And we've seen that some of the Iranian missiles hit and break through those defenses. Also worth pointing out that there is military censorship of the press in Israel, as there is in almost any country when it's in a state of war, and that means that the Israeli media journalists based in Israel are restricted from reporting whether there have been any hits on strategic locations. So we only hear about places, domestic, civilian places that have been hit. Military bases, strategic locations are not reported on, so we don't know what's happened there.
Okay, no doubt that information will emerge very soon. Run us through how it works on the ground in Israel for civilians, whether they're in Haifa, Tel Aviv, Jerusalem. As I understand it, they get almost immediate warning from the military to go to bunkers or safe places, correct?
You do. You get a text message on your mobile phone. You get the sirens in the air telling you that there is a threat. And it's from that, with that, people go down to the bunkers and shelter until they're told it's clear to come out again. In the attack we had earlier on this evening, well, that lasted about, the warning to stay in the bunkers lasted about an hour. And that when those missiles came in, and then the all clear was sounded. Similarly here in Amman, we had a similar thing, an air raid warning, which went out here about 10 minutes ago. And then there would be an all clear later when the authorities believe it's all clear.
Bernard, are you hearing anything about a missile fired at Israel from Yemen?
This is coming from the Israelis again, just a line that the Israelis are reporting that people are being ordered to shelter because of incoming missiles from Yemen and Iran. Now, the Houthis have previously fired a ballistic missile at Israel. They did it on Tuesday. This is the first, well, certainly the first time today they've done that. They have capability. The Israelis and the Americans in previous weeks before Israel attacked Iran had attacked targets in Yemen to try and degrade their capability. They've been known previously to have used modified Scud missiles in their arsenal. It's not sure what they fired this time around, but they have the capability, even though much of it's been degraded, they can clearly still fire missiles.
All right, Bernard Smith, it's the middle of the night where you are, just after 3 a.m. local, where you've seen in the last few hours volleys of Iranian missiles fired at Israel. I would point out to our viewers that Jordan being on the flight path, as you were saying earlier, of these missiles, you found yourself in the situation of just looking up and actually seeing those missiles. There we go. We're reminding ourselves of the geography. Jordan, Iraq, Syria, all of those countries right in between Iran and Israel on the flight path. That's reporting from Al Jazeera's Bernard Smith there, who's in Amman. We'll come right back to you, Bernard, if and when we get more information. Same thing on your end. You'll let us know. Thank you. Now, these attacks and counterattacks came right as Iran was engaged in talks with the U.S. over a potential deal on its nuclear program. The 6th round of indirect talks were scheduled for Sunday, but Iran's foreign minister has told Al Jazeera that those talks are now cancelled. Abbas Araghchi has said that there is no justification for continuing negotiations in light of Israel's continued attacks. So let's go to our White House correspondent, Kimberly Halkett. Kimberly, you're in Washington, D.C. Let's start with that. What are you hearing from the U.S. president on these talks? This round of talks no longer happening. We don't know if it's never going to happen or if it's just postponed at this point. But Donald Trump wanted, at least that's what he was saying, he wanted negotiations. He wanted to reach a deal with Iran on its nuclear program. So what is he saying?
Yeah, that's right. The U.S. president seems to be operating on the assumption that there still can be these indirect talks. Now, obviously, Sunday is coming fast approaching. If not in some parts of the world, it's already there. And what we know is that it doesn't appear there's any sign of those talks. Still, the Middle East envoy, Steve Witkoff, is at the ready to talk from a U.S. standpoint. Now, the U.S. president, for his part, was very active on social media on Friday, but as of Saturday, he didn't reappear for almost 24 hours after we saw the retaliatory attacks on Israel. The U.S. president posting on Truth Social that he had talked with Vladimir Putin, the Russian president. They had talked extensively about the war, and what the U.S. president also said is that he found the situation very alarming. We know that Vladimir Putin, for his part, offered to mediate, and the U.S. president responded by saying that he feels, as I do, Israel's war on Iran should end, to which I explain his, meaning Putin's, war should end, of course referring to the Russian invasion of Ukraine, one that the U.S. president promised to end on day one, but of course that has not happened.
Kimberly, what, if anything, is the U.S. president saying about American military posture in the region right now?
Yeah, well, the big concern is, of course, that there will be some sort of retaliatory attack by Iran that would affect the roughly almost 40,000, sometimes at the height 43,000 troops that are stationed in the area. And that's why we saw the first signal of the military action that was set to take place was the evacuation of non-essential personnel from Bahrain, from Baghdad, and among other locations. And so Kuwait as well. So what we know is that there's going to be, obviously, this concern that there's going to be some sort of attack. And so that's why we've seen repeatedly the U.S. president saying that if that were to happen, there would be a response in full force. That's been underscored by the Secretary of Defense and also the Secretary of State National Security Advisor, Marco Rubio. The message so far has been working, but we know that Iran's point of view is that a strike by Israel on Iran is also one that includes the United States, despite the fact that the U.S. president, when this initially happened, made a point of saying that this was unilaterally Israel's action. But given the fact that it's with the weapons paid for by U.S. taxpayers, the U.S. is obviously involved, and that's certainly how Iran sees it.
Okay, so Kimberly, I just want to make sure I'm clear on this. Where we are right now with the U.S. as far as the fighting between Iran and Israel is concerned is the U.S. is saying we're not involved in Israeli strikes on Iran. And as I understand it, the U.S. does not want to be involved and dragged into a regional war, but they are aggressively signaling that they will defend their own assets in the region. Is that a fair summation of it?
Absolutely. In other words, speaking out of both sides of its mouth. That is the big challenge here. And I think it's important to note in all of this that, Iran did attempt to make peace, which we hear repeatedly from the Trump administration is that the goal to resolve this is diplomacy. And you'll remember multiple occasions Iran was ready to make a deal, but the goalpost kept moving for Iran. Initially, it was the president, U.S. president, intimated that there would be the possibility of Iran keeping its nuclear program for civilian energy purposes, something that is its right within the non-proliferation treaty, nuclear treaty. And what we know is that it was then when Iran came to the table that the goalpost moved. And then it was like there can be no path to a nuclear weapon, meaning not even for civilian energy purposes. And that is when Iran basically said, look, we can't negotiate under these terms, and things fell apart. So in fairness, this has been a challenge. On the one hand, the U.S. president and his allies have been saying, look, we want to resolve this diplomatically, but the terms of diplomacy keep changing for Iran.
Yeah, about that, one more question for you, Kimberly, and I know I'm circling around the same themes here, but the U.S. was involved in talks with Iran on Sunday, which for us in this part of the world has already begun. On Sunday, actually, Witkoff and Irakshi were potentially going to meet directly. Until now, the talks had been indirect, and today they were maybe going to be direct. That's now off the table. Donald Trump wanted this deal, and Israel has effectively derailed it, derailed the negotiations, I should say, by attacking Iran. Now, there are some commentators who say that that was precisely the point of Israel's attacks. That's one line of analysis. Has Trump expressed any frustration that his diplomatic efforts have been derailed?
If he has, it has been in private. We know there have been multiple conversations with the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu on Thursday, on Friday. We know as far back as Monday of this week, there has been ongoing coordination and consultation. We know that the U.S. president said from the East Room earlier this week that he asked Israel not to attack Iran while negotiations are taking place. That was obviously disregarded. So if there is frustration and anger, the U.S. president has kept it to himself. But I can tell you the American people have it, particularly some of his more ardent supporters like the Make America Great Again faction of the Republican Party, people like Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene saying that many of Donald Trump's supporters do not want to see Israel drag the United States into a broader global conflict by attacking Iran.
All right, Kimberly, thank you very much. You're Al Jazeera's White House correspondent. I know you also have the U.S. military parade that's going on in Washington today. No doubt we will talk again before long, and we've got some questions for you on that. We're seeing the live feed of that right now as we speak. Kimberly, thank you very much. We'll come back to you soon. Now, the UK says that it's moving military assets to the Middle East for what it calls contingency support across the region. Prime Minister Keir Starmer says Royal Air Force jets will be sent for reinforcement as the situation between Iran and Israel escalates. Starmer has also held a call with the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, Mohammed bin Salman, to discuss de-escalation. Tehran has threatened to attack U.S., French, and British bases and assets in the region if those countries help Israel defend against Iranian strikes. Al Jazeera's diplomatic editor, James Bays, is in Banff in Western Canada, and that's where the G7 summit is set to get underway, and the tensions in the Middle East will be top of mind there.
The first of the G7 leaders to arrive in Canada is the UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer. He's announced that he's going to bolster his country's military resources in the Middle East. That, I think, to protect the UK's presence in the region. It's not a very big presence, but they do have bases in quite a number of countries across the region. That, I think, shows you the big worry among the G7 countries, the worry that this could spread, that there could be further escalation. That's a worry about the military and political situation, but also, given that this is a place where the oil and gas reserves of the world are based, a worry about the effects on the global economy. You're not just going to have the leaders of the G7 here in the Canadian Rockies in the coming days, but also their invited guests. So there are 8 other countries coming, some of them unlike the European nations and the US, who have strongly condemned Israel's actions. For example, Brazil and South Africa. So a range of voices around the table. I think the one person everyone will be trying to influence is President Donald Trump, because he's the only player here at the meeting that could really change things on the ground, because Israel and Iran, of course, are both not here. But President Trump, if he wants, could exercise influence on Prime Minister Netanyahu. He could even, either privately or publicly, order him to stop the bombardment of Iran. Of course, the big question is, would the Israeli Prime Minister even listen to President Trump? James Bays, Al Jazeera, Banff in Canada.
An Iranian member of parliament now says that they are considering shutting the Strait of Hormuz as part of their response to Israel's attacks. At its narrowest, this waterway is about 33 kilometers wide, but shipping lanes are even narrower than that. It's an important transit route for major energy-producing Gulf countries in the Gulf. An estimated 20% of the world's oil consumption is transported through the strait. Closing it would force countries to seek costlier means of transport and inevitably drive prices up, causing global inflationary pressure. Sena Tusi is Senior Fellow at the Center for International Policy. Your work, sir, focuses on producing research and analysis on U.S.-Iran relations. You're joining us live from Washington, D.C. First, your thoughts on this threat by Iran that they are seriously considering shutting the Strait of Hormuz.
So I think if the conflict goes there, that is dependent on where we are on the escalatory ladder. So if Israel starts in a very kind of fierce way, starts attacking Iran's oil and energy infrastructure and its oil refineries, at that point, I think Iran will not only attack Israel's energy infrastructure, and some of this already happened today, but I think that's the opening wave. But if they step up kind of very dramatic attacks on Iran's oil infrastructure, then I think at that level is when the Strait of Hormuz will come into play for the Iranians, potential other broader disruptions to Persian Gulf shipping. But that is like their kind of ultimate level of escalation. So we're not there yet, but today Israel struck an a gas field in southern Iran, a facility there. And Iran, in the attacks on Haifa, has reportedly struck some energy facilities there. So there has been a tit for tat on energy facilities today. And if this escalates, then that's really going to potentially threaten all the energy coming out of the Persian Gulf.
Okay, I want to make sure everyone and our viewers follow the logic of shutting the Strait of Hormuz, because this is not a direct attack on Israel, right? So this is a much wider punishment. Everybody, or a big part of the world, and oil and gas consumers get hurt if that waterway is shut, correct?
Yeah, so again, this would be at very high levels of escalation. I think this conflict could be existential for Iran. I think if Israel was not facing the kind of retaliatory action against that Iran has shown, and that Iran's capability to retaliate, and if Israel was able to act with impunity, that it could have existential consequences for Iran if the government were to collapse. Instability would potentially take root. And so Iran, in a context where things really get to, again, like the peak of the escalation ladder, I think at that point, Iran has had a policy in the past that if it is not allowed to export oil, it's not going to allow other countries in the region to export oil. Or if it can't, use the Strait of Hormuz and other countries. But I think, the Strait of Hormuz, as you say, because a lot of these countries have relatively friendly relations with Iran now, including especially Oman. So I think that, if the U.S. were to enter this war and use its bases in these countries, at that level, coupled, if things just really get to that high point of the escalation ladder, that Iran at that point might consider acting on this threat.
Sinatusi, I'm going to have to leave it at that because I see that the U.S. president is speaking live in Washington, D.C. But I thank you for your time and thank you for joining us on the Al Jazeera NewsHour. Sinatusi there. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, let's take you to that speech, the U.S. president in Washington, D.C.
And shrapnel. The U.S. Army has driven bayonets into the heart of sinister empires, crushed the ambitions of evil tyrants. Beneath the threads of American tanks, it's done so well, it's done so much, and sent the devil himself flying into full retreat. Time and again, America's enemies have learned that if you threaten the American people, our soldiers are coming for you. Your defeat will be certain, your demise will be final, and your downfall will be total and complete. Because our soldiers never give up, never surrender, and never, ever quit. They fight, 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 and they win, win, win. And that's why no institution in history has entered more names into the roster of American heroes than the U.S. Army, the Congressional Medal of Honor, more than anyone or anything. There was Mad Anthony Wayne, asked by George Washington to lead a daring midnight raid up the cliffs of Stony Point with unloaded muskets and only their bayonets to fight the redcoats. Mad Anthony replied, "Issue the order, sir, and I will storm into hell for you." Then there was the Civil War general, John Corse, shot in the face in combat. He fired off a message to his commander: "I am short a cheekbone and one ear, but I am able to whip the hell out of all of them." He stayed on the front lines, it seemed forever. In World War II, there was the great Creighton Abrams, besieged on all sides by the Nazis at the Battle of the Bulge. He boldly proclaimed, "They've got us surrounded again, the poor bastards." This is the fighting spirit and unyielding force of the U.S. Army. It has never changed, and it will never, ever change, because there is no earthly force more powerful than the brave heart of a U.S. infantryman or an Army Ranger, paratrooper, or Green Beret. They are the best. They are the finest. From Bunker Hill to San Juan Hill, from Gettysburg to Guadalcanal, from Yorktown to Shiloh, and from the trenches of the Argonne to the mountains of Afghanistan, the Army has forged a legacy of unmatched courage, untold sacrifice, and unequaled and undying glory. Our soldiers have poured out their blood by the bucketful on Missionary Ridge and Heartbreak Ridge, on the sands of Sicily, Normandy, and the Philippines, and on the dusty streets of Da Nang, Baghdad, and Fallujah. Thanks to their extraordinary service and devotion, 250 years later, America stands tall, America stands proud, and America stands free. We're the hottest country in the world right now, and our country will soon be greater and stronger than ever before. Down through history, we've been blessed beyond words by this valiant legion of Army warriors and patriots, heroes and legends. And tonight we affirm with unwavering certainty that in the years ahead and in every generation hence, Whenever duty calls and whatever danger comes, the American soldier will be there. No matter the risk, no matter the obstacles, our warriors will charge into battle. They will plunge into the crucible of fire, and they will seize the crown of victory, because the United States of America will always have the grace of Almighty God and the iron will of the United States Army. Congratulations to everybody. We love our country. We've never done better. Thank you. God bless you. God bless the Army, and God bless America. And now I'd like to ask our great First Lady to join me at the podium. Thank you very much, everybody.
You've been listening to U.S. President Donald J. Trump speaking in Washington, D.C. at the U.S. military parade across the federal capital that he has wanted to make happen for a number of years now. And now what you're watching is the split-screen reality that has taken hold in the U.S. Live pictures from Los Angeles, where, as many of our viewers will know, for days now, there have been protests against Donald Trump's immigration policy, against ICE's aggressive deportation raids. And today, those protests, it's not just LA, it's other cities as well, those protests have been dubbed the No Kings protests in reference to Donald Trump acting as a king, according to those protesters. So that's where we are right now. On the East Coast, Donald Trump in the federal capital praising the U.S. military, using words like total victory, glory, and running down a list of U.S. military successes. And then on the West Coast, as you see, direct and robust opposition to Donald Trump's presidency and policies. Al Jazeera's Teresa Bow has more from Los Angeles.
We're here in downtown Los Angeles, where thousands of people took to the streets for the No Kings protest. However, here it has a completely different meaning. People have been taken to the streets for over a week, denouncing the raids that have been carried out by immigration officers in Southern California, detaining and probably deporting hundreds of people living here, undocumented immigrants that are living here in this state. Because of these ongoing protests, the federal government, that is Donald Trump, deployed the National Guard and also 700 Marines. And that's why people here are protesting. Just until a few minutes ago, all of these people were just right in front of the detention center that's located right there. But the security forces here used rubber bullets and tear gas to move people away. This is just happening as the mayor of Los Angeles asked people to protest peacefully, mostly because they do not want the federal government to have an excuse to put the military on the streets. Until now, the National Guard has been protecting federal buildings, and so the Marines have been in their bases. They have not been on the streets. However, many here are afraid that if violence erupts, the situation could change. As we're saying this, there's still raids ongoing, detaining people across different areas, farm workers, people working in shops, in restaurants, and other locations. And that's why these people say that they will remain on the streets because they want this raid to stop. Teresa Bow, Al Jazeera, Los Angeles.
And there's plenty more still ahead on Al Jazeera. We'll take a short break, and we'll be right back. Stay with us.
China's leaders promised economic prosperity in exchange for tight control over the country's population. But is that a trade-off that the Chinese people accept?
He really sees himself as a leader who is chosen by destiny to make China strong.
Ken Roth speaks with journalist and author Emily Feng.
They do feel like they've done so much to economically develop these regions, but of course they're missing the whole picture, which is that you're also trampling on people's human rights.
Reframe on Al Jazeera.
These are the glaciers of the White Mountain Range of Peru.
some of the world's highest peaks. But growing up here, Saul Yuya has been watching them melt into Lake Palcacocha, now 34 times its original level.
When the river floods or there are avalanches, the lagoon overflows, and that could affect me and more than 50,000 people. Those of us who have contributed less to climate change are suffering more.
Experts say Peru's glaciers are doomed to disappear. 10 years ago, Saul filed a lawsuit against the German energy giant RWE, saying its emissions in Germany affect the glaciers here. But the company has never operated in Peru and denies responsibility. The judge's decision in Germany may win a tiny compensation for Huaraz. However, it may set a precedent to hold other huge emitters accountable for global warming.
The second episode of this series explores the rise of the major drug cartels and their reign of terror in the 1970s.
The Mexican government literally told the traffickers, we have to produce the body, because they knew he was dead.
America's public enemy number one is drug abuse.
And the launch of the international war on drugs, drug trafficking, politics and power, the age of drug lords on Al Jazeera.
War-torn Afghanistan, plagued with poverty and unemployment, has been central to global opiate production and is home to millions of drug addicts. Rounding them up, a former Mujahideen fighter and recovering addict dedicates his life to giving them hope. Witness a second shot on Al Jazeera.
You're watching Al Jazeera, a reminder of our headlines this hour. Air defense systems across Israel have again been activated within the past hour. The Iron Dome has been firing into the sky to intercept the latest barrage of Iranian missiles over Tel Aviv. At least 3 people have been killed in northern Israel and others injured in earlier strikes. Israel has been targeting civilian and energy infrastructure across Iran. An oil depot near the capital, Tehran, is on fire. Israel has declared Iran as the primary combat zone and downgraded Gaza to a secondary arena of war. These attacks and counterattacks came right as Iran was engaged in talks with the U.S. over a potential deal on its nuclear program. The 6th round of indirect talks were scheduled for Sunday, but Iran's foreign minister has told Al Jazeera that those talks are now canceled. And the United States is reportedly planning to shift its military resources in the Middle East. Al Jazeera's defense editor, Alex Gatopoulos, takes a look at American assets in the region.
Even without any military buildup, the United States has significant assets in and around the Gulf region. 5 Air Force expeditionary wings are based in the Gulf, 2 in Kuwait, 1 each in the UAE and Saudi Arabia that include squadrons of F-15 and F-16 fighter jets. The 5th Air Force Expeditionary Wing, based in Qatar, has no offensive capabilities of its own, but provides extensive intelligence and air refueling for Air Force units in the region. The number of air defense sites has grown over the last 18 months, with new ones built in Kuwait and a proposed site for an additional missile defense system in Qatar. The powerful US 5th Fleet is based in Bahrain in the Arabian Gulf. The Carl Vinson Carrier Strike Group has its own air wing and fleet of accompanying ships capable of attacking targets deep inland, off the coast of Yemen in the Arabian Sea. And the Indian Ocean Air Base at Diego Garcia has seen a significant buildup of B-52 bombers, F-15 long-range strike aircraft and air-to-air refueling tankers.
Now, Robert Hamilton is a former U.S. Army colonel and head of Eurasia Research at the Foreign Policy Research Institute. Earlier, he told Al Jazeera that in addition to the military hardware that's already there, both the U.S. and the U.K. are likely to move more assets into the Middle East.
2 things. You need, one, a country with the capability to move assets, and that requires either a blue water Navy capability or a long-range air logistics capability. So there aren't many other countries, European or NATO countries, that have that capability. France is one. The question then becomes, do they see their interests as affected sufficiently by this escalation between Iran and Israel to be positioned for a military response in case of an escalation? So to this point, it's just been the US and UK. I could see France also moving or at least considering moving assets into the region. It does have a carrier. It does have long-range aviation. But the U.S. doesn't really need to move a lot of assets into the region to be positioned to respond.